She called me just a secretary in front of 50 people. Then her billionaire fiancé asked what I really did for a living. I smiled and said 2 words that left the entire room in shock. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand. His family fell into complete silence. And my sister? She finally understood why I had been silent all these years. Emily Carter had never liked gatherings, especially the opulent ones. The soft hum of classical music, the clinking of champagne flutes, the polite laughter of people dressed in tailored suits and shimmering dresses. It was a language she understood, but never spoke fluently. That night, though, she had no choice. Her name was printed in gold on the invitation, her attendance quietly expected. The event, her half-sister Samantha Blake's engagement party. The venue was a penthouse ballroom in Manhattan, where the chandeliers cost more than Emily's annual salary from 5 years ago. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline like a living painting, and rows of white orchids lined the banquet tables. Everything screamed opulence, elegance, and exclusivity. Emily arrived 10 minutes after 8 o'clock, dressed in a navy blue gown, sleek, modest, and far from what Samantha would have picked. She wore no diamonds, only a small gold necklace her mother had given her on her graduation day. It was quiet, like her. Emily hadn't seen Samantha in over 2 years. Their last conversation was clipped and transactional, something about their father's health scare. Samantha was the kind of woman who made every room hers upon entry, all blonde hair, expensive perfume, and pointed charm. She had always been that way, the daughter from their father's second marriage, the one who got the private schools, the summer homes, the lavish debutante balls. Emily, by contrast, was the daughter of the first wife, the one who raised her in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens after the divorce. She had studied at night while working as a temp secretary, pay her own way through community college, and later, business school. She never asked for help, mostly because no one ever offered. As she walked into ballroom, a few heads turned, mostly from curiosity. No one knew much about the older sister. Some whispered she worked in admin. Others assumed she lived upstate, doing something ordinary. In the world Samantha moved in, invisibility was equivalent to insignificance. Near the center of the room stood Samantha, radiant in white, laughing with 2 socialites and holding a glass of Dom Perignon like it was part her hand. Her fiancé, Nathan Whitmore, stood beside her. He was tall, in a tailored charcoal suit, his presence quiet but commanding. Nathan came from old money, the kind passed down through names carved into Ivy League libraries. His family owned stakes in everything from real estate to biotech. Rumors had it he was set to inherit billions. When Samantha spotted Emily, her smile tightened by half a centimeter. "Emily," she said, drawing a name out as if tasting something unfamiliar. "You made it." "Of course," Emily replied, her voice calm, even. "Thank you for the invitation." Samantha tilted her head with the kind of performative grace that came with years of etiquette classes. "I wanted you to feel included. After all, you used to be part of the family office." Then she turned to the group beside her and added, voice sweet as syrup but loud enough to carry, "Everyone, this is Emily, my dad's old secretary." Laughter rippled across the group, like a wave crashing against granite. Controlled, polite, but unmistakably condescending. Emily blinked, the insult grazing her skin like ice. She didn't flinch. She simply smiled, a measured, unreadable curve of the lips. That was when Nathan looked at her, not with the mild disinterest of someone enduring a formality, but with genuine curiosity. His brow furrowed just slightly, his attention narrowing, as if tuning out the rest of the room. "What do you actually do for a living?" he asked. The room went quiet, not all at once, but in stages. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Even Samantha stiffened. Emily met Nathan's eyes and, after a beat, replied calmly, "I build." He raised an eyebrow. "Build what?" Samantha chuckled, a high, brittle sound. "Furniture?" she offered, trying to regain control of the narrative. Emily didn't look at her. "Companies," she said. "Sustainable infrastructure, to be exact. I co-founded a startup that designs modular housing systems. Last year, we closed a multi-year contract with the federal government. And just last week, we received a new investment round." There was no arrogance in her tone, only precision. It was a way someone might describe the weather, factual, unassuming. Nathan's expression didn't change, but a flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. "Wait," he said slowly. "You're Emily Carter, from Carter Tech." Now the silence was complete. A tray of hors d'oeuvres froze midair in the hands of a stunned waiter. One of the investors nearby glanced over, whispering something to his wife. Emily nodded once. Samantha's champagne flute slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a soft chime, the liquid bleeding into the carpet. "I thought Carter Tech was founded by 3 MIT grads," Samantha said, almost to herself. "I went to Baruch," Emily said. "The other 2 went to MIT. Degrees don't build companies. Grit does." Just then, a silver-haired man in his 60s approached. He wore a tuxedo like it was sewn into his skin, and his expression held both calculation and surprise. "You're the Carter?" he asked, extending a hand. "My name is Richard Whitmore. I believe my firm is one of your investors." Emily shook his hand. "I know who you are, Mr. Whitmore." He turned to Nathan. "Did you know?" Nathan shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving Emily. And suddenly, the woman who had walked in as a secretary was now the gravitational center of the room. The air remained still long after the shock had settled. Emily stood with quiet composure as murmurs trickled through the room. Conversations that had once orbited around Samantha's engagement now subtly rerouted their gravitational pull. People who hadn't looked her way before now assessed her through a different lens. Curiosity tinged with the undertone of recalculated respect. Nathan's question still hung in the silence, a thread he had left dangling deliberately. "Build what?" She had answered with calm precision, but now his expression had shifted. It wasn't just intrigue anymore. It was the look of a man realizing a room was not as he had imagined. He took a half-step toward her, ignoring the whispered chatter swelling behind him. "And what's the focus now?" he asked, voice low enough that only she could hear. Emily turned slightly, allowing her eyes to meet his for a moment. "Community housing. Renewable infrastructure. We're working with state departments on fast-deploy shelter systems for disaster zones. New Orleans is next." Nathan's eyes narrowed, not with skepticism, but with sharp interest. He nodded slowly, lips tightening in a line that suggested he was processing more than just her words. Behind him, Samantha stiffened again. The silence was broken by the clink of another glass. This time it was Samantha's mother, Lorraine Blake, approaching with a wide smile too tight to be sincere. "What a delightful surprise," she said, her voice honey but sharp underneath. "Emily, dear, you've certainly grown into quite a professional." Emily nodded politely. "Thank you, Lorraine." Of course. Lorraine continued, placing a manicure hand on Samantha's shoulder. "And I imagine you're very busy with all those projects. It must be difficult to find time for family." Emily offered a small smile. "I manage." But Lorraine's presence wasn't meant to celebrate Emily. It was a pivot, a subtle maneuver to redirect attention back to Samantha. "Samantha's been planning this event for months," she said, louder now, addressing a nearby couple. "You know how much effort goes into orchestrating a night like this?" The couple smiled awkwardly, half glancing at Emily, unsure now where the conversation ought to lead. Samantha forced a laugh, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. Nathan, meanwhile, was still focused entirely on Emily. "That last funding round," he said. "Was it through Venture 8? Emily blinked, surprised. "Yes. You know them?" "I sit on their advisory board." She tilted her head slightly. "Then you probably saw the projections." "I did," he said with a faint smile. "And I remember thinking whoever pitched that deck knew exactly what they were doing." From across the room, Richard Whitmore was already talking to someone on his phone, nodding slowly, gaze flicking toward Emily intermittently. Samantha's attempt to reassert control faltered further as a guest. An executive from a tech firm walked over to Emily, shaking her hand. "I've heard about your company," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I get that a lot," she replied with a faint smirk. Samantha's color had drained slightly. "Honestly," she said, voice rising just enough to cut through the crowd, "Emily's always been the quiet one. You know how some people just stay behind the scenes." Nathan turned to her now, for the first time in several minutes. That might be true, he said carefully, but sometimes the quiet ones build a stage everyone else performs on. Lorraine's smile faltered. Samantha's mouth opened, then closed. Emily decided it was enough. The room was shifting, and while she hadn't come to steal attention, she knew when to exit. Her presence had created the kind of ripple she'd spent years avoiding. And now, she didn't owe anyone more than she'd already given. "I think I'll get some air," she said softly. She turned, excused herself from the small crowd that had formed around her, and began walking toward the open balcony. The city was glowing outside, lights stretching endlessly, blinking in rhythm like a living organism. The door shut gently behind her, silencing the room. She exhaled. Moments later, the door clicked open again. She didn't turn, but she knew it was him. "I figured you might want a quieter view," Nathan said, stepping beside her. "I always liked rooftops," she replied. "They're honest. No walls. Just perspective." Nathan rested his hands on the railing. "That wasn't what I expected tonight." "Neither was I," Emily said with a light shrug. He chuckled. "Samantha never mentioned you were in tech. Or anything, really. You were just a relative from the past." "That's about right." "Why didn't you correct her?" Emily turned to him now, her expression unreadable. "Because I didn't come here to prove anything. I don't need to." Nathan studied her for a moment. "You could have, easily. But what would that say about me?" she asked. "That I needed this room to validate who I am? People who do that aren't building anything. They're just decorating their egos." Nathan laughed again, this time without irony. "That's harsh." "True, but harsh." Emily looked back toward the skyline. "Samantha and I haven't been close since we were kids. There's no real bond there. Just names on paper. I came because I thought it would mean something. To her. To show up. And now..." She hesitated. "Now, I see it was more about me than her. Closure, maybe. Or confirmation." He nodded, and for a moment neither spoke. Then he said, "Your projections were off by 10%, by the way." Emily turned her head, amused. "You ran the numbers?" "After you said I billed, I figured I should check." She laughed, a short, genuine sound. "And they were conservative. Your actual growth is better than predicted." She raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe we both underestimated me." Nathan smiled but didn't respond. Not with words. Inside, the music resumed, the attention shifting like wind. But out there on the balcony, a different conversation was taking root. One built not on legacy or reputation, but on recognition, real, unfiltered recognition. Emily stood a little straighter. For the first time that evening, the city didn't feel so loud. The next morning, the city was already awake when Emily stepped into her office. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed lower Manhattan in shades of steel and sun, and a familiar scent of roasted coffee from the startup's communal kitchen filled the air. She walked past clusters of engineers and designers huddled over prototype sketches and spreadsheets, their conversations a soft blur of collaboration. No one mentioned what had happened the night before, though a few team members had likely seen the photos now circulating online. Images of Emily standing beside the Whitmore heir, Nathan, framed in the kind of moment that begged speculation. Inside her private workspace, minimalist and clean, she hung her coat and powered on her computer. Her inbox was overflowing, congratulatory messages, meeting requests, LinkedIn invitations, all multiplied like an algorithm gaining speed. A memo from her communications director outlined a spike in search traffic. Carter Tech was now trending in several business circles. She wasn't surprised. The world was always hungry for new names, especially when those names came with a twist. The unknown founder, the secret genius, the woman no one saw coming. What did surprise her, though, was the voicemail. Her assistant had flagged it early. It wasn't from a journalist or investor. It was from Samantha. Emily hesitated for a long moment before pressing play. There was a pause, and Samantha's voice, flat and unsteady. "I don't know what last night was supposed to be. I guess congratulations. People are talking about you. You win. Again." The message ended there. No apology. No warmth. just the wounded tone of someone who had lost control over the version of the world she preferred. Emily stared at the screen, unmoved. Samantha had never cared about understanding her, only about ensuring she stayed in the shadows. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Alan Cho, one of her original co-founders. They want you on the panel at the Clean Tech Forum next week. Big names. You in? Emily typed back. Only if we talk real policy, not branding fluff. He responded with a thumbs up. That part of her life, the one she had fought for quietly, brick by brick, was gaining new weight now. But even in that rise, she felt no rush to alter her rhythm. Her pace had always been deliberate. She didn't intend to change that. Later that day, an unexpected visit unsettled her sense of order. Her receptionist buzzed in. There's a Mr. Richard Whitmore here to see you. Says he won't take more than 5 minutes. Emily paused. She hadn't anticipated a face-to-face, at least not this soon. Still, she nodded. Send him up. Richard entered with the poise of a man who never heard the word no. He wore a gray suit, darker than the one from the party, and carried a slim black folder under one arm. He didn't waste time. I'll be direct, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. You're impressive. Your numbers are strong. Your vision is cleaner than most. But it's your discipline that stands out. Emily waited. I've seen a lot of builders, he continued. Plenty flame out because they confuse attention with achievement. You're not that. She offered a cool smile. What do you want, Mr. Whitmore? I'd like to talk partnership, he said. My son is currently restructuring his holdings. He's going to spin off part of the clean energy portfolio. You'd be a smart lead, silent or public, your call. Emily leaned back. You're offering me a seat at your table. I'm offering a seat at a table you've already earned, he replied without blinking. But there's also this. He opened the folder, slid a document toward her. I assume you've heard of the Green Cities Initiative? She scanned it quickly. The federal program? New grants for sustainable urban infrastructure. My firm's been lobbying behind it for months. We believe Carter Tech is the best position to pilot one of the anchor sites. We'd back your bid. Emily nodded once, careful not to show reaction. I'll consider it. He rose. That's all I ask. You've made an impression, Ms. Carter. Some of us just took too long to notice. After he left, she sat alone in the quiet that followed. The offer was genuine and the opportunity real. But what lingered most wasn't Richard Whitmore's recognition. It was what she had seen on Nathan's face the night before. Not ambition, not surprise, but understanding. He had known, even before his father. That evening, she returned home late. Her apartment, though spacious, was simple. Concrete walls softened by shelves of books and indoor plants. She cooked pasta with olives and basil, drank a single glass of red wine, and sat in her reading chair. But she didn't open a book. Instead, she stared out the window, her thoughts circling the past. There was a reason she'd never told anyone in the family what she'd built. It wasn't modesty, it was memory. When she had first told her father, years ago, that she planned to start a company, he'd patted her shoulder and said, "That's nice, Emily, but you're very good at scheduling things." And Samantha had laughed, not cruelly, just carelessly, as if success wasn't in the cards for someone like her. That silence she had maintained, the long years of saying nothing about her rising work, hadn't been pride. It had been protection. She had learned young that being underestimated was a kind of shield. People didn't shoot arrows at shadows. And yet, part of her wondered if the silence had cost her more than it had protected. Connection, perhaps. Visibility. Or maybe just a chance to rewrite the narrative on her own terms, before others tried to do it for her. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Nathan. Short, if you're free for coffee tomorrow, I'd like to continue our conversation. No expectations, just curiosity. She stared at the screen. Then, slowly, she typed a reply. One condition. You let me choose the cafe. I like my quiet. He replied in under a minute. Deal. The cafe Emily chose was a quiet, brick-lined space tucked between a vintage bookstore and a plant shop in Tribeca. Its name wasn't printed on a large sign outside, only a discreet, hand-painted symbol on the glass door, one that most people pass without a second glance. Inside, the air smelled of espresso and cedarwood, and the sound of milk steaming over the bar blended with the soft rustle of newspaper pages. This was the kind of place Emily loved. No one here cared about last names, market valuations, or designer labels. Everyone was just a person holding a warm cup, trying to hold on to their morning. She arrived early, as she always did. Her laptop remained closed in her leather bag, and her phone lay screen down on the table. She sipped slowly from her coffee, watching the door through the reflection in the cafe's mirror wall. When Nathan finally entered, 10 minutes past the agreed time, he didn't bring an assistant or a phone in hand, just himself. He spotted her immediately, offered a small nod, and walked over. "I thought I'd have to ask a barista where the secret entrance was," he said as he took the seat across from her. She smiled faintly. "Places like this stay good because they stay hidden." The barista brought over his drink, a black Americano, which he accepted with a quiet "thank you" before retreating to the counter. There was no preamble, no need. The space itself seemed to strip away the performance that often came with their social circles. "You've been on my mind," Nathan said, leaning back slightly in his chair. "I don't mean that as a line. I just can't stop thinking about how different you are from what I expected." Emily tilted her head. "And what exactly did you expect?" "I don't know. Something louder, maybe, or more eager to be seen. Most people I meet in your position come wrapped in ambition, like armor. You're the opposite." "That's because I don't need an audience," she replied simply. "Most of my work happens when no one's watching." He nodded slowly. "My world doesn't really allow for that. Everything is under a spotlight, whether you want it or not. Then maybe you're standing under the wrong light." Nathan smiled at that, not in amusement, but in recognition. "You know, I think Samantha was right about one thing." Emily arched an eyebrow. "You are quiet, but not because you're unsure. You're quiet because you're already certain." She said nothing, but her gaze held firm. Nathan leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. "My father's not subtle. If he came to you, he's trying to tie you to the firm before your influence grows beyond reach." "He made that clear," she said. "Will you take it?" Emily paused. "I don't need him, or you, or any of this, but I'll do what serves a mission, not the ego's." That's a better compass than most people have. They talked for nearly an hour, not about business, not entirely, but about systems, how things break and why, how wealth corrupts design when it favors aesthetics over functionality. Emily described modular housing as more than architecture. It was recovery, she said, dignity that arrived in pieces, then stayed to rebuild trust. Nathan listened more than he spoke, his questions probing but never invasive. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to understand. As they stood to leave, he hesitated. "Do you think people can really change who they are?" She looked at him carefully. "Not overnight, but clarity changes people, especially when it cuts through the noise." Later that week, the press released an announcement about the Green Cities Initiative shortlist. Carter Tecca's name was on it, alongside 3 other industry leaders. Headlines followed. Photos of Emily began to appear alongside terms like visionary and unexpected leader. The attention was sudden, but she managed it the way she had managed everything, calmly, with focus. At the same time, Samantha's engagement began unraveling in quiet increments. The first signs came from within her own circle. Her friends stopped posting about her. Her name faded from the party calendars. Then, rumors began circulating, articles with vague sources mentioning a reevaluation of partnerships between the Whitmore and Blake families. Nathan hadn't said a word to the press. He didn't need to. Silence, when used well, made more impact than any press release. Lorraine Blake, once omnipresent in every luxury charity event, began making calls Emily never answered. Old family acquaintances now sent awkward messages, thinly veiled as reconnection attempts. Emily responded to none. She had no reason to reopen doors that had long since served their purpose. The shift culminated at a conference 3 weeks later. Emily was a keynote speaker. The auditorium was packed, the stage set with a minimalist backdrop. She walked out in a simple charcoal suit, no notes in hand, and spoke not about success, but about failure, about how Carter Tech's first prototype collapsed under wind pressure, how they almost lost funding 3 times, how her team slept on air mattresses in their first office for months. She talked about building from necessity, not prestige. The crowd didn't applaud out of politeness. They did it because they believed her. In the back of the room, Samantha stood unnoticed. She had come alone, unannounced, dressed in clothes that, while elegant, did nothing to hide the restlessness in her eyes. She didn't approach Emily afterward. She didn't have to. The message was loud enough without a confrontation. Outside, Nathan was waiting by the car. When Emily joined him, he opened the door without speaking. She looked at him and said, "She was there." "I know." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. As the car pulled away from the curb, Emily looked out the window. The city moved around her, fast and full of stories. But for the first time, none of them were writing her name for her. She had taken the pen. And now, she wrote the truth without masks, without noise, without asking for permission. The Monday after the conference, Emily sat alone in her office as the sun rose across the skyline, painting the windows in tones of amber and steel. The city was waking up, its momentum sharpening, and yet she remained still, her eyes trained on the streets below. That morning's headlines were already circulating. Carter Tech's speech cited as the most grounded keynote in years by tech analysts and praised by urban development planners for its pragmatism over performance. But what filled Emily with quiet reflection wasn't the media coverage. It was the way the audience had listened. Not to her resume, not to her affiliations, but to her story. To the truth she had kept under lock and key for so many years, shared finally not to provoke applause, but to free herself from the weight of concealment. Her silence, once a shield, had transformed into something rarer. Authority. Not the kind granted by headlines or endorsement, but the kind earned through the discipline of building something real, of letting the work speak for itself. The calls had already started flooding in, from city governments, from think tanks, from firms that once overlooked her name in favor of louder, shinier ones. She responded selectively. Her team was instructed to funnel only those opportunities that aligned with the mission. Emily wasn't chasing legacy. She was chasing solutions. Later that morning, during a team strategy session, her assistant walked in with a message marked urgent, not from an agency, not from a client, but from the White House. Her chief of staff handed her a sealed envelope, the physical form already signaling its weight. Emily opened it slowly, reading in silence while the team watched with hesitant curiosity. When she finally looked up, her voice was even. "They've asked for a meeting," she said. "Not a proposal, not a briefing, a direct sit-down. Thursday, West Wing." A few team members exchanged glances, stunned. Alan Cho, ever the realest among them, finally broke the silence. "They want us to lead the New Orleans pilot, don't they?" Emily nodded once, and possibly more. The room didn't erupt. This wasn't a team that celebrated in confetti and champagne. It was a team that had been sleeping in shifts on shipping crates 5 years earlier. Their form of celebration was simpler. A look exchange, a breath release, a new set of files opened. Work to be done, plans to revise, schedules to accelerate. That night, after hours of planning and preparation, Emily walked home instead of taking a car. She passed through familiar streets with unfamiliar clarity, every light and intersection a reminder of how long the journey had been, not in years, but in internal distance. What she had wanted once was acknowledgement. Now, what she craved was alignment. No stage, no spotlight, just the right people asking the right questions in the right rooms. Back at her apartment, she placed her keys on the counter and checked her phone. 2 missed calls from Samantha, 1 voicemail. She stared at the screen, debating. Then, almost against instinct, she played the message. "I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm still trying to win." Samantha's voice began, softer than Emily had ever heard it. "I saw the speech. I stayed through the whole thing. You were brilliant, and it hurt, not because you succeeded, but because I realized how little I've tried to know you. I kept trying to make you smaller so I could feel bigger. I'm sorry. I know it's probably too late, but I wanted to say that out loud." There was no request for a callback, No invitation for reconciliation, just an overdue truth delivered plainly. Emily let the phone drop back to the table. She felt no need to respond. Some apologies served more the speaker than the listener, and she had learned that forgiveness didn't always require a bridge. It sometimes required a boundary. Later that week, as she walked through the security gates of the White House, Emily felt no nerves. Her steps were measured, her posture relaxed. She was greeted by senior officials, briefed in a marble-lined room, then led to a policy chamber where the president's infrastructure advisors waited. They asked hard questions. She gave harder answers. No promises, only frameworks. No guarantees, only models and metrics. At one point, one of the senior aides asked, "How did Carter Tech scale so fast without a single PR campaign?" Emily folded her hands calmly on the table. Because we weren't trying to impress. We were trying to solve. That answer, simple as it was, carried more weight than a portfolio ever could. By the end of the meeting, she had secured not only the New Orleans project, but a long-term advisory role on the Urban Resilience Board. The decision was unanimous. The silent one had become the voice they needed most. Back in New York, the world around her adjusted. People walked into rooms differently when she entered. Boards now angled their proposals toward her perspective. Invitations came daily, many declined. She stayed grounded. Office mornings, strategy briefings, early nights. She let the noise grow around her, never through her. Samantha, after that voicemail, didn't reach out again. Lorraine eventually sent an email, a long letter, filled with excuses, memories, veiled regret. Emily read it once, then archived it. Not deleted, not ignored. Just placed where it belonged, in the past. As summer waned, Emily stood once more in her office, watching the sun dip over the Hudson. Her desk was empty except for one object, the small gold necklace her mother had given her all those years ago. A reminder that strength came quietly, without ceremony. When her phone rang, she didn't rush to answer it. It was a call from a blocked number. She waited, then picked up. "This is Emily." A warm, calm voice responded. "This is Director Langley from the Office of Sustainability. The president asked if you'd be willing to lead a closed-session think tank for long-term climate housing." She smiled, her voice as composed as ever. "Tell him I accept, but I'll bring my own team." Silence never meant absence. Sometimes it meant control, precision, strategy, and in Emily's case, it always meant one thing above all: power, real, earned, and finally recognized.